So, Sydney, Adam just talked about a little bit with, this idea of AI and art and creativity. Do you have any sorts of expectations or standards for your students when it comes to, and I know you mentioned you do have a digital media or digital arts class,
Yep.
do you address the elephant in the room with students?
Yeah, I do. You have to, right?
Hmm.
Um, there's so much discussion in just like the general arts community about generative AI, right? Um, and what's acceptable and what isn't, and what these models are being trained on, and all that, right? That's a whole separate conversation for the most part, but the kids know that AI exists. The kids know, I know AI exists. What they don't know is how identifiable it can be if you're taking straight from AI. Um, they don't have the same grammar structure if they're writing an essay. We did photo essays, and there was a couple that were AI generated, and it's pretty easy to tell. But they don't realize how easy it is to tell. So I think that them understanding that you can use AI, that's okay, but you have to take responsibility for what you're using from AI, like Adam said, right? Um, you can't just take it all as yours. Art is so personal. And what I hear from a lot of kids once we actually discuss the use of AI is, we talk about whether it's the same as tracing. We talk about whether it's the same as referencing if you're generating pieces. Um, and what we usually come away with is that it's not necessarily your work. It's something to help, but it's not your work. And the heart and soul of art is you as a creator. So I think that eventually, if we address it, they do understand
Hmm.
um, what that process looks like with AI being a part of it, and not as the entirety of the process.
Right.
And Sydney, so that since that's a like the hands-on creative discipline where like because it is such a personal thing, and you have students that come and they create in your room. Um, do you see, are there ways where you see technology and how you use it complementing that process and kind of still enabling them to keep their creative persona, but then use technology in positive ways without losing some of that?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's entire fields that are dedicated to technologically based artwork, right? Digital art, digital photography, graphic design. And if the students aren't able to adapt to those or utilize them, they will struggle in the future. Their future does involve digital art. Obviously, students are pretty used to having things hands on in art, um, so there's a little resistance to that factor of technology. But once they understand, like, hey, this is something that is going to be part of your life, right? The company Kodak, right? They partially failed because they didn't adapt to digital photography. They were stuck in that film era. They thought digital photography was a huge fad, and they were wrong. So they failed because of that. And I use that as an example in digital photography, our class. We don't have a dark room. We use cameras, digital cameras, to take those photos. We edit them digitally. And of course, you can take those things and use them physically, things like collages or retouching things. Um, but I think that it's pretty hand in hand at this point. Subjects like ceramics, maybe not as much, but a lot of them, things like drawing, painting, if you are generating ideas with that, it's helping you to get some feedback on the way that you're thinking about your projects. You can certainly integrate it pretty simply in art.
Cool. So what do you think, continuing along these lines, and I could tell that you use a lot of technology in your coursework in a hands-on elective class, right? But what do you think are some of the challenges of integrating technology while still preserving, the idea that you're trying to develop those foundational artistic, creative skills for students?
Sure. I think and this was kind of touched on earlier, but I do feel like students, I do feel like students tend to put a little less effort into wholly digital work. Again, because I feel like it's such a different process that students tend to use those as shortcuts, right? So when we're doing digital work, the challenge is getting them to think while they are editing or while they're drawing or while they're doing whatever they're doing. Because even in digital art, things like line quality, texture, colors, those still matter. The visual impact in the end is one of the important pieces of creating art. And that visual impact is just as important, whether it's digital or physical. And I think, again, that idea of it being about the process and about learning those basics and then taking those basics and twisting them, rather than really focusing on having this, image at the end of it is super important. The elements and principles of visual arts still apply no matter what kind of art you're making.
It sounds like too, it's very iterative, like,
Yeah.
and it can be, even if you're working on it in digital forms, keep tweaking it and, fine tuning it to get to the point where it is that final clear expression of what you're trying to convey
Yep.
with the guiding principles that you talked about.
Yes. Reflection is so important in artwork.
Mhm.
And again, if you aren't able to, go back and look at your work and improve it, then that's where you're really going to be missing out on that creativity piece.
So what unique opportunities do you see for technology in elective courses that might differ from core subjects?
I do think that a lot of things that are useful in elective courses are also useful in core classes. For the most part, the tools are pretty similar. And a lot of the time there's like a kind of a false separation between cores and electives. Because ideally, electives should feed into core classes and core classes should feed into electives. We should be working on similar skills, especially with technology, where a lot of that basis is the same. But in terms of like specific tools that can be used in an art room specifically, there are virtual gallery tours, right, that are specific to the arts that are amazing to go through, especially if you're in a rural district where you can't necessarily get out and see all these things. Google Arts and Culture, that site is amazing. They have pocket galleries where you can go through like a 3D gallery and see all these works. You can see artist statements. You can see what a real gallery looks like and the environment of an art gallery without, necessarily having to bring 40 kids to the MIA, right?
Mhm.
And especially if you're not able to have those opportunities, it's amazing. So, but I do think those gallery tours and everything like that can easily be integrated into other classes, right? Even drawing tablets that are being used, Photoshop, those are all things that you can use in every class. So of course there's things that are art specific, but I really, really, really think that electives and core are separated so often, and they shouldn't necessarily be. I think those tools are good for everybody.
Yeah, I think you make an excellent point. And I think if they get exposed to a tool, say in an art class, and then they can find a way to apply it in another one, boy, what did you just do to those connections between the students, activating prior knowledge and,
Yes.
and then how are they going to reflect upon it afterwards too? It's just really, really cool.
I'm laughing a little bit because I'm thinking of my kids who I teach Photoshop to, and then they Photoshop their other teachers in two different situations, which is always really funny. So that's why I was
Again, responsible and ethical uses of these tools, people.
Yes, we talk about that too.
So one more here for you, Sydney. Do you think when students come to your class, like maybe they've never had you as a teacher before, right? And they come into your class, do you think that they're a little bit more open or more resistant to using technology in an elective art class than they would be in because they kind of expect it that they're going to be using it in their core classes, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like core classes, these guys grew up on writing their essays in Google Docs and reading ebooks and watching YouTube for like social studies intros and getting academic journals for science, right? Or, using photomath for math or whatever it is. But when you're learning art as a kid, you're learning with like a crayon in your hands, right? You're not doing digital stuff. And the most that they've done a lot of times when they get up to me with technology in the art classroom is that they've maybe documented their work on like Seesaw on iPads. So it's not something that they're super used to. And it's asking them to do something new and challenging, maybe, which we all know that there's a little fear of the unknown, and they might not be super comfortable with technology like that. So I do feel like they tend to see it as kind of a departure when they get into some of my courses. Even when we do like Blookets at the beginning of class, they're like, they always have their paintbrushes in hand already and they're like ready to go. And I'm like, nah, we're going to review actually. Sorry. So we got to slow them down a little bit. But I do think that there's a lot of discussion in, again, the art world. There's a lot of controversy about digital art itself. And, you know, whether it's a shortcut or whether it's real art or whatever it is, right? Which are, you know, kind of silly questions, but I think they hear that and they absorb it and it's never really challenged. So it's asking them to do something new that they're not used to. And in all of our classes, that's something we struggle with. So once they get used to it and they start to understand it, they have much more fun than at first. But the first couple of weeks are sometimes, yeah, pretty resistant. And it's super interesting to see these, you know, what we call digital natives, I suppose, really struggle with technology sometimes.